Oh, now I'm live. Anyway, welcome back. Let's see if this is the first day I can fully remember the first invocation prayer here. I'm going to check it out real first. I think I got it. Om Jnana Chaksur. No, one more time. Om Jnana Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Well, not perfect, but closest one yet. We'll get her next time. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, so we're on 336. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Very good question. Krishna responds, the next verse. The blessed Lord said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring, sinful enemy of this world. Okay, very explicit response here from Krishna. I'm going to see if this one's in my notes. Yeah, lust is the only enemy, 337. Oh, doesn't say how many people are here on StreamYard. I guess that's only on YouTube. Might want to read the purport on this one. Okay. When a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust. And that's why lust is so bad, because it's the mirror. This is me now. It's the mirror reflection of the most bona fide feeling you can have, which is love of Godhead. So that's like the supreme consciousness. And then the perversion of that, the same thing, but the other side of the coin, is lust. So that is our number one enemy. But at the same time, it's like, it's the other side of the coin. So it feels, that's why it's so dangerous, because it feels like the real thing, but it never is. Prabhupada continues, in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. So that's how you make yogurt, sour tamarind, eh? Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion. Illusion continues the material existence. It's hard for me to see how wrath turns into illusion. I mean, I can see it ultimately, but as a one-to-one, like lust, then wrath, then illusion, I feel like there's a lot of steps in between wrath and illusion. But like what happens with me is I lie to myself. If I'm lusty for something and I don't get it, there's that feeling of wrath. And then, after that is kind of like, oh, well, it's probably too far beneath me anyway, or he said, she said, whatever. I just basically say lies to justify that I don't have the thing that I want. And that's illusion. And illusion is Maya, that is material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. All right, I got more space now. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If, therefore, The modes of passion, instead of being degraded into the modes of ignorance, are elevated to goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting. Then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give a facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. And when they are completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. One should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadyasya Yato Nvayad Itaratas Cha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, engaged his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Great example. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. Okay, that's a really strong statement by Prabhupada as well, that not only are these lust and wrath so horrible, but they can even be our friends. They're not only, just some big stumbling block that, we have to be really dogmatic to avoid. It's like you can start to easily see them as your friend. And in the end, everything is your friend. That's what Krishna consciousness means. It's when you're doing everything for Krishna and all you are experiencing is Krishna, then, that's what it's like for Krishna. He's the friend and benefactor of all living entities. So when you get closer to him, that quality of being comes into you more and more. And there's far fewer enemies. You might be like Jesus, where they'll kill you. It may not be fun, but you'll say things just like Jesus said. Forgive them, for they know not what you do. I learned last night, or maybe remembered, that Jesus, when he was in India, his name was Isa. And I believe that is a bona fide holy name of the Lord, whereas Jesus Christ, I really don't think it is anymore. One, it's English, so it's a degraded language, and it's lost. Things are lost in translation with that name. But more importantly, in recent years, recent decades, Jesus Christ has become a swear word that atheists use, Hollywood uses. It's most often used as a cuss word. So, and that, I believe, would diminish its potency and shakti and good qualities. Whereas Isa, which is Sanskrit and sounds a lot like Krishna. If Krishna is the father, Isa is the son. They sound like that. But then it's not only that. There's also Yeshua. There's the Hebrew and Aramaic holy names that I do believe are holy names of Jesus, and Greek as well. Greek and Latin, I think, would still count as holy names of Isa. Something to keep in mind of if you're into Jesus. See, it's so easy to make fun of that word Jesus because it's already so degraded. I don't think it's a holy name anymore. But Isa is supreme. All glories to Shri Shri Isa Swami Maharaj. Avatar, maybe. It's better. 338. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb. Similarly, the living entity is covered by different degrees of this lust. So lust is not only the greatest and only enemy, it's everywhere. It's surrounding us all the time. This is true. Prabhupada says there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived instead of fully perceived, only a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. And this is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. Oh, so we're talking about beginning, middle, and end. Prabhupada hasn't explicitly said the 3 degrees of covering, but anyway. Cleansing process by so many. Yeah, the best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position. For the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. And the trees have been put in a condition of life by a great exhibition of lust, and they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is like birds and beasts, and the smoke covered by fire is like a human being. Very interesting. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness. You might blow away some of that smoke. And if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. I'm still not sure the 3 degrees of covering. What Prabhupada says later is that there's, trees? Basically, yeah, there's like trees, then birds and beasts, then humans. So those are 3, but is that the 3 degrees of covering? I think so, yeah. And it probably should be understood that birds and beasts doesn't mean only birds and only beasts. It means all other living entities in that tattva. And trees also means other living entities that are just like trees. Mountains, maybe? And there are there's many different species of human. And perhaps the demigods are in that category too, although their fire has much less smoke than ours. But perhaps it's kind of in the same tattva when you're only dealing with these 3 degrees of the covering of the soul. 339. Thus, a man's pure consciousness is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. And Prabhupada says in his purport, the material world is called Maitunya Agara, Maitunya Agar, Maitunya Agar, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. So don't have sex. That's what I've been realizing more and more recently is I just really got to avoid the ladies completely, at least while I'm in this country. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. Okay, I do not see how that flowed. Advancement by that means increasing the duration of the. But what does that have to do with lust? Oh, because lust and sense gratification are basically the same thing. So if you keep getting more lusty, you're going to have more time to be stuck here. And so lust is that symbol of ignorance by which we're stuck here. I mean, he already made his point. I don't think he needed to do another argument there. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually the so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. Because it's not real happiness. And it tricks you into thinking it's real happiness, and then you're stuck. Just like in the previous verse, wrath turning into illusion. So even if you're not lusty, if you're just having fun playing a video game, for instance, you're in illusion because you're probably thinking, oh, it's really fun. No, it's just a little bit fun, and then it's temporary. It's not real. Okay, 340. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust, which veils the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Okay, very important verse again from Krishna. He's telling us where to find this enemy so that we can take it down. Senses, mind, intelligence. So the senses, how do you, that's the easy one, I think. How do you get rid of lust in terms of the senses? Well, you don't contemplate sense objects. I believe we already talked about that from chapter 3 or chapter 2. What my friend Kavi says is don't look twice. So, it's normal if you go to a store, you see a pretty girl. I mean, you can't help but look at people when you're in a crowded place. You'll just look at people. But if you take one look and you think, oh, that looks nice, and then you look again, you're screwed. It's that second look that turns into a third look, that turns into contemplation, that turns into attachment and lust and fall down. So with the senses, just don't use them towards sense objects. That's all. Use them towards some things that are not lusty, like look at a forest, look at a sunset. I'm looking at my clothes hanging up right now. They're just clothes. They're not bothering me at all. Paintings. I got some of those I'm looking at. The deities. Puja table. These are all totally fine to look at, will not cause you any lust. Now the mind, when the mind has lust, it's typically right after you've been, using your senses to look at lusty things. And then your mind will keep playing images or sounds or whatever. So how do you get lust out of the mind? Well, basically, you use your intelligence to focus the mind on something that isn't lusty. So the ideal way, it seems, is to stop lust at the beginning, to nip it at the bud, and don't engage your senses in lust-filled sense objects. But if for whatever reason your mind has some lusty things, all the mind has to do is just start focusing on things that aren't lusty instead, just like your senses. That's the same thing your senses do. But with the mind, it's I think more difficult because the mind, at the speed of mind, the mind can look at anything it wants to. Like it can look at sense objects that are even more attractive than things you see in real life. They're not real, but it's still the capability and imagination can be so strong. And if you don't have, so controlling the mind means intelligence. That's what intelligence means. Now you're really screwed if your intelligence genuinely believes that, focusing on the lusty objects is good. At that point, you're really screwed. But hopefully, you're at least at the point where your intelligence is catching the mind doing bad things, and it's saying, okay, stop that. To some degree or another, it might say, the intelligence might say, okay, do this for 5 more minutes, but then we're going to do some work after this. Or, okay, mind, you want to look at the lusty objects? Okay, we're going to do that, but we're going to practice detachment while we do it. Very few people in ISKCON talking about this, but I do this all the time. It's a very effective and bona fide technique, which we simply call detachment. This is something the Buddhists are much better at than us. And there's probably many other forms of Hinduism that are also better at it than us because they need it more than we do. Because when you have a higher taste of Krishna and you're doing all this personal service and whatever for Krishna, everything gets, it is like a magic pill or something where everything gets taken care of. But it only works when you actually have that higher taste and ecstatic devotion and ananda, prema, and so on. If you don't, and you're just engaging in the motions, just doing the aratik, but thinking nonsense in your head, there's very little good things there. That's a big problem. That's Maya. It's good Maya, it's pious Maya, but it's still Maya, it's still illusion. Yeah, but you can always practice detachment. Because lust is all about getting something and calling it mine, right? So if you look at a lusty sense object, let's choose a new one, like a piece of chocolate cake. And you look at it with detachment and you say, that's a cake, it's chocolate, it probably tastes good. Who cares? It's not mine, it's just a piece of cake. That is using the intelligence and mind to take the lust and the attachment out of what the senses are seeing. Whereas you get into trouble when you're an overeater like me and you look at the cake and you go, that probably tastes really good and it's going to go bad. I better eat it soon. Or someone else might want that cake and it's my cake and blah, blah. That's how you get all the lust there. I, me, and mine. And obviously just sense enjoyment, of course. So you can, another way to practice detachment is you're looking at the cake and you say, oh, that's prasadam. That's not cake. That's Krishna's mercy. It's not cake. And when you fully accept that, which is really hard to do, then you'll, not only is there less lust, well, that lust becomes spiritualized and becomes transformed into the good lust, the love of Godhead. And also, it'll help you see that cake is no different than any other food. That is, if it's prasadam, it's prasadam. There isn't really a big difference. That being said, it doesn't make sense to honor some prasadam, which is just really tastes bad or is bad for your health or body or something, and then trick yourself into thinking it's just as good as something which has equal spiritual value but happens to be healthier and tastes better and so on. That is better, obviously. Assuming that the spiritual value is the same, which is very impossible to actually think about. So you have to follow me hypothetically here. That's called philosophy. Let's see what Prabhupada says here in 340 purport. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. The enemy meaning lust. Therefore, Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus the mind is the reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. The false identification of the spirit soul is explained in the Bhagavatam. It doesn't say what verse, unfortunately. A human being, quote, a human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, oh boy, who considers the land of birth as worshipable, oh boy, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered as an ass or a cow. It is really funny how each of those examples I can relate with in different ways. Like going to a place of pilgrimage just to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge. I did that recently. I went to a temple for the first time, and actually I did meet some people and talk a little bit. I'm still like shy. I don't actually like talking to people that much, but no, it's not a good example. I was going to say, well, I just ate the prasadam and left, but I didn't even have the prasadam. The line was too long and it was hot out. I couldn't, and I just left. And the land of birth as worshipable. It's so funny. I'm on the opposite spectrum of that, where like I really want to be able to do that, and I just can't. I see the land of my birth as just this degraded s-hole that I'm so happy to be away from. The byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen. The obvious example of that I'm thinking of is seed. Is when the man spills the seed and goes, oh, those are my babies. And no, there are living entities in there, but oh boy, the body isn't you. So why would the byproducts of the body be you? It's nonsense. Okay, 341. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Important to note here, Acharya Dev, my Diksha Guru, I was watching an old sermon he did a while ago, and he said, when Krishna calls Arjuna a Bharat, he's talking about an ethnicity. Arjuna was a Bharat, just like I am an American. And so even though it's true that we are not this body and we are not American or Indian or whatever, that's still a fact of reality. And this Krishna consciousness that we have here, been given from Prabhupada, is supposed to be localized in every place that it is. It's not supposed to be Hindu Krishna consciousness outside of Hindu places. Hindu people should be Hindu, Americans should be American, Africans should be African, and so on. And this actually happened where I think it was Nairobi in Africa, where they were preaching. Prabhupada was there, and he saw that all the Hindus were, for whatever reason, the Hindu diaspora was there, and they were all the disciples of his were all preaching to the Hindus there because it's easy, right? And Prabhupada said, no, this is nonsense. We want African Vaishnavas in Africa, So that's what Krishna West is about, obviously, but it's really just common sense. The fact that my Diksha Guru had to get to this point where he started a whole thing with a name and it was a controversy shows how fundamentally stupid so many people are, where the idea of being American in America is just like, whoa, can't possibly do that. It's unbelievable. I mean, obviously the principles never change. If Americans say, "Oh, I don't want to say Hare Krishna, I want to say Hare Hare God, Hare God, God God, Hare Hare," because Krishna's God, so it's the same thing. No, that's a principle. You don't get to change that. A lot of things you don't get to change. But the details, you get to change all of them, and you should change at least most of them to make people be interested. If I'm not into Hindu stuff, which I'm not, I mean, like maybe the ancient Vedic stuff I like, but nothing modern. And you insist on me wearing a dhoti and all this stuff, I'm like, I'm going to be turned off. And then that's one more person you lose who might go somewhere else to another church, another temple, or dojo, whatever. It's very simple stuff. Anyway, we won't continue on that. Looking at the purport here, Prabhupada says, lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. I think he's saying the love of God is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna Bhakti from the beginning, the natural love of Godhead cannot deteriorate into lust. Now, the obvious implication of that is that these Guru Kuli children, the sons and daughters of Prabhupada disciples who fell down quickly and did not stay in Krishna Bhakti, they were not educated properly. Education is critically important. That's another thing I was watching Acharya Dev talk about earlier. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. That's why we're all here. That's what it means to be alive. It means you had love of God, and then you had a desire to do something else. And so Krishna said, sure, here you go. And now you're here. And it's hard to get back. But Krishna Bhakti is so powerful, even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of Bhakti. 342. How long are we going here? 32 minutes? Let's see how far we get. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than intelligence. It's pretty obvious. I think we'll keep going. Wait a second. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul, Dharma, is what Sanatan Dharma is what we're talking about here, and then engage the mind. The intelligence has to engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. The intelligence has to whip the mind into doing the rounds, going to the temple, whatever, everything else, pada sevanam, whatever. That solves the whole problem, Prabhupada says. A neophyte is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of senses. And you have to strengthen the mind by intelligence. Complete surrender, automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there's every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So I think what Prabhupada's referring to there is these people, like myself, I used to be one of them, still am in a way, who focus on all these yogas, detachment and all these different mystical techniques to gain a better intelligence, a better mind, a better um, handle of the soul or whatever, better realization of the soul. But if you achieve all these things and you don't have Krishna, um, what you're left with is basically a more finely tuned sense gratification machine. So, and the temptation is still there. So when it knocks again, you'll enjoy even more, which is even more of a chance of falling down. So you need a center to hold everything together, or you could think about it as a summit on the peak of the mountain that we're always aiming towards. If you forget that you're going to the summit, you can get lost in one of the valleys and stay there for centuries. But if you're looking only at the summit or only at the heart of something, you'll get there. 343. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Curious what spiritual strength is in the word for word. Atmana means by deliberate intelligence, but obviously it's a word from, oh my God. Atmanam means the mind. Atmana means by the intelligence. So, and then Jahi, conquer the mind and intelligence. The enemy, this lust is formidable. Thus, your intelligence is superior. Steady the mind. That's the word, is samstabhya, by steadying the mind. Yeah, so that's how Prabhupada gets spiritual strength. Is it's when Krishna's talking about the intelligence, the superior intelligence or buddhi. It's the job of buddhi to steady the mind. So this is what strength means. This is why it's so important, guys, to get into the Sanskrit, because what Krishna's saying is actually a little different than what Prabhupada's saying. And even if you listen to just what Prabhupada's saying, your English is different from his English, your definition of strength is different from his, you still could lose so much here. Strength does not mean just like controlling it in a macho way. That's not what Krishna says here. Krishna says sam stabhya, and sam is the same as samadhi, sankirtan. It's the same prefix in English where we get synchronicity. It means like a coming together, syncing. So syncing the mind or steadying the mind. So when the mind goes too high, the intelligence brings it down a notch. You could also, like, controlling the mind is could include that as well. But conquer is the same. What Prabhupada says and Krishna says is the same word. It's conquer. Because this lust is an enemy, and Krishna is telling us we have to see it like that. It's a war. This is a spiritual warfare engaging with us every single moment within ourselves. It's a war. It's war. And we are fighting for our lives every single moment. And we need a steady hand to beat the enemy. If we're both aiming at each other and one guy's hand is more steady, his aim will be better, and boom, he'll win. That's what we're talking about here. Prabhupada says, this is the last verse here, so I guess we're done, but I'll read the purport. This third chapter of the Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna Bhakti by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of Krishna, without considering impersonal voidness as the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and sense gratification are the greatest enemies of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind. By steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. Steady intelligence directed toward one's pure identity. That's what Krishna is talking about in this verse here. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. I think I disagree with Prabhupada on this one. Never is a strong word. I'm living proof of that. If I didn't do yoga and judo and all this stuff, it would have been a lot harder to do bhakti. But once again, I mean, the way I see something like this, it's not that Prabhupada's wrong and I'm right. It's that Prabhupada's preaching. And from his perspective, I mean, he has to sometimes use these strong words so we get it into our numb skulls that to not waste our time with the other things, like, you know, and I do agree with that, and I am at that platform also. So like when I do like yoga, when I do stretching, I do it to maintain the body. I don't think that all of a sudden there's going to be some grand realization that'll be superior to my bhakti practice. I don't think that will happen or can happen or whatever, unless I'm like doing bhakti while I'm doing yoga. Like if I'm chanting while I'm doing yoga, then maybe, but just going to like a judo class or a yoga class and thinking this is the supreme end all be all or whatever, I know it's not true. So I don't do it in that way. But at the same time, if you're just, chanting all the time and you're at an ISKCON temple and you're eating halva 10 pounds every day and, eating huge prasadam feast late at night and then waking up super early, again, it's not healthy. It's against Ayurveda. It's against common sense. It's just not that healthy. So the idea of, doing yoga and other techniques to improve your apparatus, of course, is fine. The problem is when you confuse that for Krishna consciousness. That's when it's a problem. Okay, next time we will continue with Chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge. Thanks for playing. Hardball.